This week on Jerusalem Dateline, a flare-up on Israel's northern border. Will it erupt into a full-scale war with Hezbollah? Plus, Iran's missile launch. The terrorist state continues its strive for nuclear weapons. And a firm foundation. Our look at the growing number of Christian ministries that are supporting Israel. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you this week from the Israeli-Lebanese border. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is blaming Iran for an attack that killed 2 Israeli soldiers, wounded 7, and left northern Israel on the brink of a possible war. After the attack, the IDF put its forces on high alert, responded with artillery bombardment, and launched at least 50 airstrikes. The Hezbollah attack took place not far down this road. From here on in, it's a closed military zone. It's the deadliest attack by Hezbollah against Israel in more than 8 years, since the 2006 Second Lebanon War. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Iran of being behind the attack.
Whoever is behind this attack will pay the full price. For some time, Iran, via Hezbollah, has been trying to establish an additional terrorist front against us from the Golan Heights. We are taking strong and responsible action against this attempt.
The attack follows a strike by Israel last week that killed several Hezbollah soldiers and an Iranian general inside Syria near the Golan Heights. It reveals Iran has regional ambitions and wants to safeguard its nuclear program.
They are trying to make a front in the Golan to say to Israel, if you will attack our nuclear system, so we can act through Lebanon, through Syria, through everywhere, and we have tens of thousands of missiles with Hezbollah and Syria.
While many analysts feel the border will quiet down, it remains a very fragile situation. The Hezbollah attack here in Israel is just the latest in a series of events creating tensions in the Middle East, from the death of King Abdullah to the rise of ISIS and the upcoming elections in Israel. How will the U.S. and Israeli leaders meet the new challenges? CBN senior editor John Wagi and terrorism analyst Eric Stackelbeck share their wisdom and insight.
We have with us here in Virginia Beach, CBN News senior editor John Wagi, and joining us from Washington is our CBN terrorism analyst Eric Stackelbeck. Eric, let's begin with you. First, the events along Israel's northern border. A ceasefire ended the war between Israel and Hezbollah back in 2006, but after this week's incidents, do you see the conflict getting bigger?
I do. From what we're seeing right now is a ratcheting up of hostilities without a doubt, and it's only a matter of time, Ephraim, before Israel and Hezbollah, I believe, engage again in really an all-out war. And I think this will be the war, I guess, to settle the score.
Eyebrows were raised when the president changed his plans to go pay his respect to the new Saudi king, yet he had no time to honor the victims in Paris and, of course, did not attend the Holocaust victim services in Poland. Your reaction to that?
Well, I think, number one, the apparent disregard of the administration for that anti-terror rally in Paris was an embarrassment. Look, the United States, the president of the United States, we are the leaders of the free world. And for us not to be there, not to even send a high-ranking administration official, at least the vice president or the secretary of state, for me spoke volumes about where this administration stands in this global existential struggle against radical Islam. But on the other hand, making your way to Saudi Arabia, and look, I get it, Ephraim, administration after administration, Republican and Democrat, have catered to the Saudis. Unfortunately, Saudi Arabia has done more than anyone in the world to spread radical Islam around the globe. Ephraim, over the past few decades, the Saudis have spent billions of dollars in that oil money to build radical mosques and schools throughout Europe and the United States. Yes, we have similar enemies right now in ISIS and Iran and Hezbollah, but at the end of the day, let's remember, the Saudi regime is a radical Islamic regime which has funded jihad around the world, and may I add, 15 of the 19 9/11 hijackers hailed from Saudi Arabia and were weaned on that Saudi Wahhabism from a young age.
All right. Well, John, let's bring you in the conversation here. Prime Minister Netanyahu's opponents in Israel say that he's playing politics before the elections by coming to address a joint session of Congress here in the U.S. Do you think that's going to create backlash against him?
Well, it's funny, Ephraim. His opponents are shocked that he would play politics like this. Look, there's politics being played on both sides, but politics aren't the chief issue. And in fairness to Netanyahu, give him credit for the last 12 to 15 years spreading the word about Iran's danger to the world, not just Israel, about the nuclear weapons. So the fact that he's invited when some Republicans and Democrats in Congress are very, very concerned that the White House could reach a bad deal with Iran and allow them to get nuclear weapons ultimately, I think that Netanyahu can handle the political backlash that may be arising in his country right now. And also, politics is a lifetime. In Israel, like a few weeks, the elections are March 17th, so that's a lifetime between now and then. Netanyahu is down a bit in the polls now. His opponents are mobilizing and unifying. The Arabs have created a united bloc to run against him for the first time ever, and so he does have some opponents that are making headway, but several weeks, that can change around 180. It's possible.
Speaking of elections, the White House says it's going to stay out. But there are now reports that Obama campaign people are organizing opposition to Netanyahu. Your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, they want to be above the fray, and it's the Republicans in Congress who are playing politics with it. But in reality, there is politics being played on that side. And make no mistake, they would love to oust Netanyahu. They say it's like we would like to bring a change and everything, but the administration would love to see him gone. Europe would love to see him gone. The left in Israel would love to see him gone. And that's what this is about. Not necessarily trying to defeat Likud, but trying to get Netanyahu out of the prime minister's office.
He's a strong man indeed. Eric, we know that Jordan agreed to a prisoner exchange with ISIS. Jordan is supposed to be a close U.S. ally. How serious is this?
Well, Jordan is an ally for sure, Ephraim, in the struggle against the jihad. ISIS has Jordan in its crosshairs, but this is part and parcel for what we've seen from many of our allies in this war. They don't share our view, Ephraim, in terms of hostage exchanges and not negotiating with terrorists. Actually, that view has apparently changed under the Obama administration. We now do negotiate with terrorists here in the U.S., but Europe and countries like Jordan, look, they will do hostage exchange. ISIS has made hundreds of millions of dollars, for instance, Ephraim, from Europe. European governments are willing to buck up and pay ISIS to get their hostages back. So I think we're seeing that again here in Jordan. Again, a different philosophy in many ways than we here in the United States have. Although Jordan is going to do this exchange, apparently, they still are very, very threatened by ISIS. That does not change. But unfortunately, these other governments have different philosophies on dealing with terrorists, and they are very willing to cut a deal. And they're going to, by the way, going to release a female jihadist, one of the Jordanians who was involved in an attack in Jordan years ago. So, you know, blood on her hands, to say the least. But this is the price Jordan is willing to pay.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it. Thank you both, Eric Stakelbeck and John Waggy. Appreciate both of your time.
New video evidence by an Israeli news organization provides more evidence about Iran's nuclear ambitions and how it puts Israel and other countries, including the U.S., at risk. The video taken from satellite images by Israel's Eresby satellite reveals a 27-meter or nearly 90-foot tall missile. This never-before-seen missile and launch site stands outside Tehran and appears capable of sending a rocket into space or launching an ICBM. Some reports indicate the Pentagon estimates it might have been 2 years in development. Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Dory Gold says this latest revelation clearly poses a clear and present danger to America.
Originally, many in the U.S. think of Iran as, well, you know, that's a problem for Saudi Arabia or Israel, but it's not our problem. That's not true. The trend in Iranian planning for long-range missiles that can eventually reach the eastern seaboard of the United States, that's a given now.
Gold says the Iranian nuclear and missile threat prompted Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to accept U.S. House Speaker John Boehner's invitation to address a joint session of Congress early in March. Despite the potential political fallout, he'll use the platform to warn America and the world about the growing danger. Yet the White House and Congress differ on how to respond to the Iranian threat. The administration wants to negotiate, while congressional leaders from both parties prefer any negotiations to include the threat of sanctions. Senate Democrat Bob Menendez recently made this startling comment.
The more I hear from the administration and its quotes, the more it sounds like talking points that come straight out of Tehran.
Republican Senator Bob Corker told Jerusalem news agencies he can't understand why the president promises to veto upcoming congressional legislation about Iran even before it's been written.
For Congress not to have the ability to weigh in on this, which has such geopolitical importance and a place where Congress has played such an important role, is ridiculous and candidly irresponsible for Congress not to play a role.
Iran, the U.S., and 5 other nations negotiating Iran's nuclear program have set a June 30th deadline for reaching a final settlement. Some leaders on both sides of the Atlantic believe the expanding nuclear and missile program represents Iran's ultimate goals of attacking what it calls the little Satan Israel and the great Satan, the United States. Up next, learn more about a new organization that is bringing pro-Israel groups from around the globe to support Israel. Israel faces enemies not only here on its northern border, but around the world. We talked with Pastor Wayne Hillston at the King of Kings congregation in Jerusalem about a new venture that's bringing ministries from around the world to stand with the Jewish state. Well, Pastor Wayne Hillston, here we are. You're pastor of King of Kings congregation here in Jerusalem, and you're starting a new venture that's quite exciting. Tell us about it, what its name is, and what's the vision?
It's called FIRM, Fellowship of Israel-Related Ministries. So the goal of this is to bring together ministries, leaders in the Christian world that have a heart for the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, and to bring them together to get to know one another, to develop something that will be natural in developing partnerships, cooperation, synergy will happen, and then they're going to discover there are thousands, maybe millions of people around the world who have a passion for God's purposes for this nation of Israel.
Right. Do you think this is the time for this? It's a special time to be bringing this together and sort of linking all these ministries around the world?
Anti-Semitism is on the rise. It reminds us a lot of the 30s leading up to the rise of Hitler, and there was a passivity even among Christians at that time and allowing that to take place. And there was a warped theology that we call replacement theology, believing that God is finished with the Jews. He's replaced the Jewish people with the church. The church is the new chosen people, and the Jews are passé. In fact, God has rejected them altogether. And so this is the time to stop anti-Semitism. This is the time to correct an errant theology. It's not biblical. And we're going to be teaching that very clearly from the scriptures. It's also a time to hand on the torch of truth about Israel to next generations. Millennials, we call them, age 18 to 34. Many of them really have no understanding about God's purposes for Israel. In my generation, we all remember the Holocaust like it happened yesterday. We remember the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. We saw the victories of Israel against all odds, winning the Six-Day War in 1967. This generation, these younger people, never witnessed that firsthand. They weren't alive when those events took place. We need to wake up a younger generation to what the Bible says and what's really going on in spiritual places, high places, principalities and powers, demonic forces that have always raged against the people of God.
And it's a young venture, it's just a few weeks or a few months old. What kind of response have you had?
It's been remarkable. First of all, I began to invite key leaders around the world to join the board. I was looking for 10 people, so I invited 20. Well, we ended up with just about 20 because everybody saw the importance of this and said, we want to be on board with this. And then we partnered with Resurrection Fellowship of Loveland, Colorado to have a conference called the Israel Summit Stand Firm. It's really taken from the passage in Daniel chapter 11 where it says, they who know their God will stand firm and take action. So we're saying no more passivity. Christians, arise. Take your stand on the biblical stance that God has for his people Israel. Agree with God and stand for his purposes.
If people want to know more about FIRM, if they want to participate in the conference by live streaming, what would they do?
They go to israelsummit.org, and everything's there. what this is all about, who's speaking, who's leading worship. And we've got terrific people. Pastor Jack Hayford will be preaching, Dr. Michael Brown, Jonathan Burness, Caleb Myers, I'll be speaking as well, Paul Wilbur leading worship, and many young worship leaders as well, including my own son, Jamie Hillston. And so they can go there, and there is an option to register to get live streaming from the event. So the sessions will be available, and people can participate in that way as well.
Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, an exclusive interview about how Israel is turning its attention to India, China, and beyond. One major development here in the region is that Israel is increasingly turning its attention to the Far East. We talked with former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Dory Gold, about this phenomenon. Ambassador Gold, thank you for being with us. You just came back from India. What was the purpose of your trip?
The Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs was actually invited by an Indian think tank, which was very close to the government of Prime Minister Modi. And we were interested in enhancing Israeli-Indian ties, looking at similar perceptions of what's going on in the world, and seeing whether we might do joint studies in the future.
Do you see a growing relationship between Israel and India?
Unquestionably, there are growing interests, a shared interest between India and Israel. And you can see that now in terms of how the two countries address each other, the relationship of Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Is this a growing trend, not only with India, but Israel reaching out to other nations in Asia like China and Japan?
You know, there's no decision to do an Israeli pivot to Asia, as there has been an American decision to make a pivot of that sort.
Sure.
But at the same time, this outreach of Israel to Asia and Asia's outreach to Israel is just accelerating all the time. There's another point also, that in much of Israel's commercial ties with Europe, all these conditions are now placed on our business relationships. If there's a product that comes out of the West Bank, then maybe the European Union has to oppose it. I don't want to get into all the details, but it creates a certain burden in the relationship. And when you go to the East, that burden isn't there.
No restrictions like that?
No. You know, the classic peace process issues, which are always in the beginning of some discussion, if you go to London, Paris, or Berlin, they're just not there when you're in New Delhi or Beijing or Tokyo. The focus is how can these countries work together for to advance their common interest.
What's the benefit to the capitals of Asia, Beijing, Hong Kong, Tokyo? Why are they reaching out to Israel?
Well, I think they see that Israel is an Asian tiger. In other words, they see that Israel's knowledge base in advanced information technologies and medical science and all the fields that are important today, both from a standpoint of what countries want to have in terms of their own capabilities, but also in terms of how do you boost your efficiency and your GNP. You go into these industries. So I think they see Israel's natural advantages in these areas, and they simply want to cooperate more extensively.
I know you say this is not a pivot, but is some of it an outgrowth of the growing terrorism in places like Paris or France, or and perhaps a growing animus, I guess, in Europe towards the Jewish state?
Well, you know, Israel's had its issues with Europe for many years now. And I don't think people in Israel are saying we've had it with Europe, but there is something embracing about the relationships that Israel's establishing in the Pacific Rim. And I think you're going to see more of that in the future.
Okay, Ambassador Gold, thank you very much for being with us. Up next, Israelis mark a grim anniversary, remembering the Holocaust 70 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. Finally this week, hundreds of Israelis, including many Holocaust survivors, gathered in the northern city of Haifa to mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It also marked the 70th anniversary of the liberation of one of the most notorious concentration camps. 80,277. That's the number Nazis tattooed on 95-year-old Shoshana Colemer's arm at Auschwitz decades ago.
I had typhus and was on my feet the whole time. I had a lung infection and a fever. I went to work because I didn't want to die by gas. I said, what will be, will be. If I die here, I die. But I didn't want to die by gas. And thank God, I stayed alive.
Colemer gathered with about 100 Auschwitz survivors in Haifa to commemorate the liberation of the camp, where she spent more than a year and a half. She remembers the day the Red Army came to set them free.
A rabbi came, and he said, we are free, and we can go home. But who had a home? They killed all my family, my brother and sisters.
At Auschwitz itself, some 3,000 people commemorated the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the extermination camp. The Nazis murdered about 1 million Jews in Auschwitz-Birkenau, along with 100,000 other prisoners of war. As time goes on, there are fewer and fewer survivors. This may be the last big anniversary many of them will commemorate. They want to make sure that the horrors of the Holocaust will be remembered even after they're gone.
Many of them, when we talk to them, their greatest fear is that people really won't believe what happened to them and that they'll forget.
David Parsons, spokesman of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, spoke at the Haifa event.
Christians need to help preserve this legacy. We need to fight anti-Semitism. We need to help the survivors that are still around us. We need to help Jews who are facing anti-Semitism, like in France and Ukraine and other places, to come home to Israel.
When you hear stories like that, and there are millions more, you understand why the Jewish people say, never again. Well, that's it for this edition. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you from the Israeli-Lebanese border. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.